welcome to another episode of Fridays with Fawn. I'm Fawn Lopez, publisher of Modern Healthcare and your host today. Joining me today is Sally Deitch, Group Chief Executive Officer, Mid-South Group, Memphis Market CEO, and St. Francis CEO at Tenet Healthcare. Sally, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Fawn. What an awesome opportunity. I appreciate you not only having me, but I am one of your biggest fans. So
and the same for me about you. I've been watching you and your career success over the last 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
I've been super impressed by what you've been able to do, both personally and professionally. So your background is in nursing, but you have been a healthcare executive since you were 31 years old. What inspired you to take a role in administration? And more importantly, how has your clinical background and nursing experience contributed to your success as a group CEO for Tenet?
Wow, what a great question. So yes, I've been a nurse for 30 years. I always back up and I will tell you that my first experiences with, I would call it leadership, was right after I graduated. And I had graduated from nursing school, was started in the operating room in endoscopy. And I was maybe 3 months in, and my boss, who was going to retire, I will never forget it, Doris Benitez. I owe her a tremendous amount. I remember she came to me and she said, "You're young, you should know how to do this." And I had no idea what she was even talking about, but I remember looking to my two preceptors and I said, "What do I do?" And they said, just go, just do whatever she tells you to do. And so by the end of my first year of nursing, not only was I learning how to be a nurse in those areas, but I had done, her capital budget, her operating budget. I had rewritten the policies and procedures. I was doing her payroll. I was doing the scheduling. I went through a joint commission survey. I was doing, at that time we called it QA, but all of the performance improvement activities. And I never thought anything different. Nobody ever told me, what are you doing? Stop. You need to, why are you doing that? If anything, all of my preceptors just kept saying, just do it. And so after a year, she announced her retirement, and it was the surgeons and the gastroenterologists that went to the CEO and said, "We want Sally to be the next director." And so here I was, this little 23-year-old, person. And I will never forget it. And I remember him looking at me and going, "Are you serious?" But he said, "I'll give you 6 months. Let's see what you got." And so that's, really what started my career path and getting into an administrative side. It was never intentional. It was always, in many ways, I always think it was kind of, it was an accident, but I think there's a certain characteristic of people who get into leadership of wanting to figure something out that ends up benefiting a larger group. And so it started from there. And I have been very fortunate in my career that along the way and through all the paths that I've gone, somebody has said, "Go learn it." Yeah. And so it didn't matter whether it was figuring out how to read my financial statement, which I can tell you at the beginning, I couldn't balance my own checkbook, let alone read a P&L or a balance sheet or anything like that, to how did materials management work and how do we create a charge master and how do we charge patients, to how I went through a process of a voir dire and an actual trial. There were so many pieces along the way that luckily I had mentors or bosses or somebody at a corporate level or wherever that said, "Here's a different option." That it wasn't just the clinical side.
So what a great story that is. You know what? It's about you too. You're someone who loves to learn, right? So having the opportunity and the encouragement of learning and taking the opportunities to experience new things, that's such a fantastic story.
And
Good
it's
for
been,
you.
and it broadens everything you do. I
Yeah.
think the lens you approach things with, I think is always shaped by your foundation. So I always tell people, I will always think like a nurse. I
Mhm.
think my nursing background, you think through the scientific method. You assess, you diagnose. You're going to continue to do that regardless of the problem that's put in front of you or the situation. But so as I think like a clinician, but my experiences have been so broad now that you can look at scenarios in different ways and go, okay, I've been in this before, different world, but I've been through this in a different time, and I need to evaluate in a different way. So, yeah, absolutely, I think it influences everything I do.
Good for you. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
So, speaking of leadership and success, women and people of color, as you know, unfortunately are still underrepresented in leadership roles and in boardrooms. You've held key leadership roles at Tenet, and most recently, congratulations, you were reappointed to the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas to its El Paso board of directors. What advice can you give other women and people of color who are looking to advance their career?
Right. I think fun, and I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. I am a Latina by background, and my heritage, I am a second generation American. I think what's always interesting for me is, my maiden name is Hurt and my married name is Deitch. And so I have two German last names. And a lot of times I think people look at me and go, you are not Hispanic. And yet I am a Canales and I am a Polanco. And, there is very much my heritage that I'm very not only proud and honored to carry forward, but that have really molded kind of who I am. And so I think it's, it is interesting to me to watch the evolution of how not only taking the factor of gender, but of taking the pieces of looking at race and looking at ethnicity into account now, and how do we as people that are diverse, what do we bring to the table? It's almost in many ways like taking a step back and evaluating what does the bigger picture look like. And to me, it's too easy too often to say, well, this is what I am, and I'm going to put it in your face, and I'm a woman, and I'm a this, and I'm a that. And really, it to me isn't that being the first approach. It is, what do I bring to the table from an experience standpoint? And my perspectives are different because of my gender, because of my ethnicity. So my perspectives may be a little bit different from yours, but there's so much value in that, for you to actually understand a different perspective. And so I think it is absolutely imperative right now that we talk more about the value of our differences and what that brings to the table, versus saying, well, I've got a quota or I've got a number I want to hit. May not that I think to many people kind of makes them step back, versus saying, I really do need to value different perspectives of individuals for these reasons.
What great advice. And I know why we share so much, why I like you so much, because we share a lot in common. I'm a Dang. My maiden name is Dang, and I'm Vietnamese. So I'm not a Latina. I'm not, I was born in Vietnam. But anyway, so what you just said is so important. And I think on the flip side, for those of us who are interested in advancing in our careers, we need to keep focusing on and believing in our value proposition, what we bring to the table, right? And having that sense of confidence and belief in yourself is an important element, right? Important factor. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Um, you've had such an amazing an accomplished career. Looking back, and I think you talked about Doris earlier, who has been the greatest influence on your career? And
believe it or not, it's going to be my dad, and he's not a nurse, not a healthcare provider at all. My dad's a football coach. My dad's actually won 2 state football titles in high school football in Texas, and it's phenomenal. But my dad, as the perpetual coach, I can remember my first leadership job as a department director, and I'm 23 years old. And I remember going to a bar with my dad because he was like, "Let's go have a beer." So we went to a bar.
That's so cool.
I know. And I said to him, Dad, I'm 23. Everybody that works for me is older than me. They're all older than me. And I mean, and most of them, they've taught me. I mean, how do you motivate people? How do you connect with people and become a leader? And I can remember, I vividly remember this conversation and him saying, you have to understand each person individually. And he would always translate it to a sport. And he'd say, okay, so when I'm coaching kids, he said, there are football players that if they're doing the wrong thing, if I grab them by the face mask and get in their face and yell at them and, why are you, he said, there's certain ones that sparks an automatic, he said, almost like I'm going to prove you wrong. Watch what I do. He said, there are other kids, if I did that too, that would absolutely shrink away, and it breaks them more than anything else. And he said, so, it's like a process of going through and identifying what is that triggers that desire to do better, that desire to challenge yourself to excel in something. And the only way to do that is really to individually almost get to know and work with somebody. So he would always just kind of sit down and give me this advice that was very, at least for me, in my brain, made sense based on how I was raised. And so I was like, oh, that makes sense, or how does recognition, how is it important to people and why, and what types of recognition? And again, it was always a very individual type of approach. And he'd always tell me, you're a better coach than you'll ever be a mentor or you'll ever be a boss, because somebody that can truly coach someone creates a path to excel. If you're nothing more than the boss, if you're nothing more, if that's your role, that's how people will see you. But when they've got a coach and that coach helps you to really achieve more that you bring out of yourself, that's the person that you go to for the rest of your life and think, this is the person that pushed me to figure out me. And
I just love that. That is so awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. So that's Hampton Hurt 101, my dad and the coach. I mean, and so that's my inspiration. I think, in many ways, I always tell people, I will show you the path and I will help you along the way. But my job isn't to blaze that path. My job is to tell you you're doing it right, or how could you do it better, or what if you approached it this way, or this is what I'm seeing and you're not fitting this. You're creating more waves than you are succeeding. I mean, when you can coach somebody, it's a very different approach than being the boss.
That's awesome. So let's switch gear a little bit to COVID, right? So being that COVID-19, the pandemic has had such an impact on all of our lives during the past year. I have to ask you, what leadership lessons did you take away from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Oh my gosh. I think so many. I think we've been reliant as an industry on kind of the same old ways of communication, of thinking that, we had and we'll always have months to plan something. We can go through and say, well, what does the future look like? And develop strategies that we think are going to be important. And I think what COVID really not only forced us to recognize and realize is that, number one, the nursing shortage is not only true and alive and well, but our workforce has dramatically changed. And, what's important for people sometimes doesn't make sense to administrators, so if I'm the nurse that all of a sudden I can make 10,000 a week or 12,000 a week and have the ability to get my family out of debt, have the ability to, make a better life during this time and to capitalize on that, I think it's too easy to vilify that versus looking at the reason why. So I think it's identified. Our nursing shortage is alive and well. Our workforce wants and values different things than what we as employers think they should have sometimes. And how do we now come to a reckoning of that? And then I would say communication. I mean, the way we communicate, I am not, especially now, a huge fan of the Zoom world. I'm tired of the online communication. I think we've lost that face-to-face personal interaction with people. And then lastly, I think, there's also that piece of personal responsibility and how do we balance our personal responsibility to our professional responsibility. And I think it's made all of us question that, whether in the hospitals, it's, whether it was a question of PPE and how do we protect our staff to, it's easy to do that and then walk out the door and go to a party, and so how are we part of the solution, and recognizing where the science is. And I think, unfortunately, in 2020, that science was so, it was a mumbo jumbo at a certain point. And every day it seemed like something was changing. We were getting different guidance, and some of our leaders wanted to use that guidance in different ways that wasn't necessarily maybe the best for our communities. But, I think as hospital leaders, we were very challenged to have a certain approach and stick with that approach and protect our employees and realize that coming out of this, we will have a lot of work to do to reconcile all of the impacts it's had.
That's so true. You mentioned balancing. So I understand that you have 5 sons, right? So I think you know that I'm one of 5 girls. So with such a large family, what have you done to balance your life so well? Any advice for other women, working moms actually, out there that are trying to find success in both work and home life?
Yeah, and Fawn, it's changed. I mean, it's evolved. I always use this story because it really was at a certain point in my career. My children are now older. So the youngest is 12, but the oldest is 19. So I've got 1 in college and then 3 in middle school and high school. But, when they were little, and it became imperative for me, and I used to tell people my breakfast story. So I worked very long hours. And so I would tell my assistant, my admin, I'd say, okay, Bonnie, do not schedule anything before 9 in the morning. And not that I couldn't do anything before 9, but I'd really try for her not to schedule things before 9 in the morning unless absolutely necessary. And so my routine would start at 5:30 in the morning. I'd get up and I'd shower and change and get really ready for work. And at 6:30 in the morning, I would start waking up kids. And it was like, I'd wake them all up and got to get moving, let's go. And then I became a short order cook in the morning. And so I always made my kids breakfast. And they could have whatever they wanted. That was the rule. My husband basically gave up after about a month. He's like, I am not even going in the kitchen, but whatever they wanted, they could have. So, this one was pancakes, this one was waffles, this one was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I mean, they could basically have whatever they wanted. And so I'd make them breakfast and they'd all sit around the table and I'd just stay in the kitchen with them. And while I'm cooking and feeding them, they'd talk and we'd talk just about the day, about what was coming up, things that were going on. And then I'd make their lunches and then they were ready to go. 7:30 to 8, they were out the door and going to school. And so that was my time with them. And then I would go to work and, a lot of times, obviously getting home and I'd miss homework or I'd miss dinner. But but my time in the morning with my kids was the most important thing when they were little. And it's changed over time to, what the times that I spend with them and how I spend time with them. But I think it's always that piece of finding what is going to be the quality piece you put in. And it truly is a balance of quality over quantity. Because I could spend a lot of time at home and be very busy on my computer or very busy taking calls and not have any interaction with my kids.
Mhm.
So, it is a very purposeful type of approach in trying to say what is important for you and them to create that connection.
That's so great. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Sally, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I do have one last question,
Okay.
and that is, what gets you excited, or what do you look forward to in 2021, given that 2020 was so challenging? What is one thing that gets you excited about this year?
Maybe because I'm a person that I love change, and I always tell people, most people are change averse. I am not change averse because what I've seen in my history is that change creates opportunity. And when you can look at something and say, what opportunities are going to come out of this? I think we're going to have so many. And I'm excited, when I think, especially from a workforce standpoint, the things we will be able to do and really kind of think outside of the box on how do we engage our teams to look at staffing of the future. What does that look like? What does that even look like to them?
Mhm.
I think that the days of trying to just put back in a traditional model is not going to work. I think we have to be innovators in that sense. And I think our clinicians deserve that. I think really anybody that works in a hospital deserves the ability to be part of the solution. And so we've got to have some really different kind of dialoguing about what healthcare and healthcare employees look like outside of 2021 to 2022 to 2030 and beyond, because it will be different. And so to me, that's a big, for me, I'm very excited about that and what that's going to look like.
Thank you.
So it'll be
Great.
good.
Awesome. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your very busy schedule and sharing your story with us. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. As always, I look forward to seeing you on the next Fridays with Fawn, and really hope that you'll join us for our Women Leaders in Healthcare Conference on July 22nd and 23rd. Again, thank you so much. Bye-bye.